Sophia carries my future, something you could never give me, James declared, his voice slicing through the chandelier-lit dining hall, each word a calculated barb aimed at Amara. Her wheelchair gleamed under the soft glow, her dark skin catching the light as she sat, poised, among the stunned guests. His arm encircled Sophia's pregnant waist, a public coronation of his betrayal. The crowd's murmurs faded, their eyes darting to Amara, expecting tears. Instead, her lips curved into a smile, sharp, enigmatic, chilling James's smug grin. Her fingers tightened on the armrests, her pulse a fierce rhythm. He thinks he's won, she thought, her heart pounding with a secret she'd yet to unveil. The music she'd composed for this night swelled, a haunting prelude to her truth, ready to shatter his carefully orchestrated lies. Subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories of resilience and revelation. Amara's fingers curled tightly around the armrests of her wheelchair, the cool metal biting into her palms. The hum of the crowd filled the air, a low murmur that vibrated like a tuning fork against her skin. She sat at the edge of the elegant dining hall, her midnight blue gown catching the soft glow of chandeliers. Her heart thumped, not with fear but with something sharper, something alive. She could hear it, the cadence of betrayal in the clink of glasses, the false laughter, the rustle of expensive fabric as guests turned to whisper. They were all here, in her home, to witness her unraveling. James stood on the small stage, his tailored suit pristine, his smile ablade. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "tonight is about new beginnings." His arm slid around Sophia, the woman beside him, her pregnant belly a silent announcement. Amara's gaze locked on Sophia's hand, resting lightly on James's sleeve, her nails painted a bold crimson. "I'm thrilled to introduce Sophia, our new creative partner," James continued, his eyes sweeping the room, "and the woman who's brought joy back into my life." The room stilled. A fork clattered against a plate somewhere. Amara's throat tightened, but she forced her lips into a smile, a slow, deliberate curve that felt like drawing a bow across a violin string. James's gaze flickered to her, and for a moment, his confident mask cracked. His brow twitched, a question unspoken. "What are you hiding, Amara?" She held his stare, her smile unwavering, and watched a shadow of unease ripple across his face. "You've always been about vision, haven't you, James?" she said softly, her voice cutting through the silence like a single piano note. The guests shifted, unsure whether to clap or hold their breath. James's smile tightened, his hand dropping from Sophia's waist. "Let's raise a glass," he said, recovering, lifting his champagne flute. "To the future." Amara's fingers twitched, itching to reach for the control on her wheelchair. Instead, she pressed a small button hidden in the armrest. The sound system, programmed earlier that day, responded. A haunting melody, one of her own, composed in the feverish nights of their early marriage, swelled through the speakers. The notes were delicate at first, then jagged, like glass breaking in slow motion. The crowd stirred, some recognizing the piece, others sensing its weight. James's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the sound booth, but Amara's smile only widened. "You don't control this stage, not tonight." "Beautiful choice, Amara," a guest murmured nearby, a producer who'd once begged for her score. She nodded, her pulse quickening, not from flattery but from the thrill of her silent rebellion. Her skin prickled as she felt James's gaze linger, searching for cracks in her composure. "He thinks I'm broken," she thought, her chest tightening. "He thinks I'll crumble." But her heart sang a different tune, one of defiance, of secrets held close. Sophia leaned closer to James, whispering something that made his shoulders relax. Amara's eyes narrowed, catching the way Sophia's fingers brushed his wrist, possessive yet performative. She's playing a part too, Amara realized, her mind racing. The realization stung, not because of jealousy, but because it confirmed what she'd suspected for months. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated rewriting of her life. "Amara," James called, his voice warm but edged with warning. "Won't you join us for a toast?" He gestured toward her, the perfect host, the devoted husband. The crowd turned, their pity a tangible weight. She felt it in their averted eyes, their polite smiles. Her fingers tightened again, nails digging into her palms, grounding her. "Of course," she said, her tone light, almost musical. She maneuvered her wheelchair forward, the soft whir of the motor blending with the fading notes of her composition. The crowd parted, their murmurs a dissonant chord. As she reached the stage, James bent down, his hand resting on her shoulder. A gesture that might have seemed tender to others, but felt like a leash to her. His fingers pressed too hard, a silent command. "Stay in your place." "Always the gracious host," she said, looking up at him, her eyes sharp as a conductor's baton. His smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. She saw it, the flicker of doubt, the question he couldn't ask aloud. "What do you know?" Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the thrill of holding a secret he couldn't touch. "To Amara," James said, raising his glass again, his voice smooth but his eyes cold. "Her strength inspires us all." The lie dripped from his lips like honey, and the crowd clapped, oblivious. Amara lifted her glass, her hand steady, though inside her emotions churned like a storm at sea. "Strength," she thought bitterly. "You've spent years trying to bury it." As the applause faded, she caught Sophia's gaze. The younger woman's smile was polite, but her eyes held a challenge, a claim staked. Amara's chest ached, not from heartbreak, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers brushing the hidden button again. The music shifted, a single piercing note cutting through the chatter. Heads turned, confused as the sound grew louder, a prelude to something darker. "James," she said, her voice low, meant only for him. "You've always loved a grand performance." His hand froze on her shoulder, his breath hitching. She tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "Let's see how you handle mine." The note lingered, a warning, a promise. Amara's pulse raced, her skin alive with the electricity of what was to come. She wasn't the broken melody James thought he'd written. She was the composer, and this was only the first measure. Amara's fingers lingered on the piano keys, the ghost of a melody still humming in her bones. She sat alone in the dim light of their old studio, the walls lined with awards and faded posters of films her music had brought to life. Her wheelchair felt like an anchor, grounding her in a reality she hadn't chosen. The memory of James's hand on Sophia's waist burned in her mind, but it was the echo of his words. "The woman who's brought joy back into my life." That cut deeper, a dissonant chord she couldn't unhear. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow, as if the air itself carried his betrayal. She closed her eyes, letting the silence of the room settle. 6 years ago, she thought, this was our sanctuary. Her mind drifted to a night in this very studio, the air thick with the scent of coffee and possibility. James had leaned against the doorframe, his tie loosened, watching her tweak a crescendo on the piano. "You're a genius, Mara," he'd said, his voice warm, unguarded. She'd laughed, brushing off the compliment, but his eyes had held hers, sparking with something real. They'd danced, clumsy and laughing, to a half-finished score, their shadows swaying against the walls. That was the James she'd loved, the one who saw her music as magic, not a commodity. Now her fingers twitched, aching to play. She pressed a key, the note sharp and solitary. It wasn't enough. "He's rewritten our song," she thought, her pulse quickening. The memory shifted to a later moment, a year before the accident. They'd been in a meeting with producers, her score for a war drama up for discussion. She'd suggested a softer motif for the climax, but James had cut her off mid-sentence. "Let's keep it bold," he'd said, his smile tight, dismissive. The producers had nodded, and she'd swallowed her protest, her cheeks burning. It was the first time she'd felt it, his need to dim her light. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. A text from Nia, her old friend and cellist. "You okay after tonight? I saw his face when you smiled. He's scared." Amara's lips twitched, a flicker of defiance. "Good," she typed back. "I'm fine. Meet me tomorrow?" Nia's reply was instant. "Name the time. I'm bringing coffee and rage." Amara's laugh was soft, almost a sob. Nia's loyalty was a lifeline, A reminder of who she'd been before the wheelchair, before James's lies. She wheeled to the window, the city lights blurring through a sheen of unshed tears. Her reflection stared back, dark skin, sharp cheekbones, eyes that held too many secrets. She thought of the accident, the night the stage collapsed beneath her. The memory was jagged, the creak of the platform, the sudden weightlessness, the pain that swallowed her whole. James had been there afterward, his face pale, his hands shaking as he held hers in the hospital. "I'll fix this," he'd promised, but his promises had turned to control. Medications she didn't need, appointments he scheduled, a life he'd reshaped to keep her small. Her fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. She'd found a report in his office last week, buried in a drawer she wasn't supposed to open. The stage platform had been flagged for repairs, but James had signed off on it, citing budget constraints. Her breath hitched, a cold realization settling in her gut. Was it an accident? The thought was a poison, spreading through her veins. She pushed it down, but it lingered, a low hum of doubt. "Amara?" James's voice cut through the silence, sharp and close. She flinched, her heart lurching as she turned. He stood in the doorway, his tie undone, his eyes scanning her like a predator sizing up prey. "You're up late," he said, his tone too casual, too practiced. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across the piano. "That stunt with the music tonight, what was that?" Her pulse raced, but she kept her voice steady, a single note held firm. "Just reminding everyone who I am." Her eyes met his, unflinching. His jaw twitched, a crack in his facade. "You're not yourself," he said, softer now, his hand reaching for her shoulder. She jerked back, the movement sharp, instinctive. His eyes narrowed, a flash of something, anger, fear, crossing his face. "You need rest, Mara. The meds. I took them," she lied, her voice smooth, her smile a shield. She could feel the absence of the pills, the fog lifting from her mind. She'd flushed them down the sink hours ago, a quiet act of rebellion. His gaze lingered, searching for weakness, but she gave him nothing. "Good," he said finally, stepping back. "We have a big week ahead. Sophia's taking on more at the company. You'll like her, once you get to know her." The words were a blade, casual but deliberate, meant to wound. Amara's chest ached, but she held her ground, her fingers brushing the piano keys, a silent promise to herself. "Sleep well, James," she said, her voice low, laced with something he couldn't quite place. He hesitated, then turned, his footsteps echoing down the hall. She waited until the door clicked shut before exhaling, her hands trembling. The studio felt alive again, the air humming with possibility. She pressed another key, the note resonating, a spark in the dark. "He thinks he knows my song," she thought, her heart pounding with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. "But I'm rewriting it." The melody in her mind was growing, sharp and fierce, a prelude to a reckoning. She leaned forward, her fingers dancing across the keys, and for the first time in months, she heard herself. Clear, unbroken, ready to fight. Amara's breath caught in her throat, a sharp, jagged thing, as the memory of the fall surged unbidden. Her fingers gripped the edge of the piano, the wood cool against her skin, grounding her. The studio was silent now, save for the faint hum of the city beyond the window. But in her mind, she was back on that stage, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and rain. The platform had groaned beneath her weight, a warning she'd barely registered before it gave way, plunging her into darkness. Her spine had screamed, her world collapsing with it. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the memory away, but it clung like damp cloth, heavy and suffocating. "Amara?" Nia's voice cut through the haze, soft but insistent. She stood in the doorway, holding two steaming mugs, her dark curls pulled back, her eyes sharp with concern. Amara forced a smile, her lips trembling as she unclenched her hands. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Nia said, setting the coffee down and pulling a chair close. Her cello case leaned against the wall, a silent sentinel. "Maybe I have," Amara murmured, her voice low, raw. She glanced at the piano, its keys gleaming like teeth in the dim light. "I keep hearing it, Nia." The moment it all broke. Her fingers twitched, tracing the ghost of a melody she hadn't played since that night. A score meant for a film about survival, now a cruel irony. Nia's brow furrowed, but she didn't push. Instead, she slid a folder across the table, its edges worn, the contents heavy with promise. "I found something," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. From the theater, the inspection report for the stage platform. Amara's pulse quickened, a staccato beat. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the text. Structural instability detected. Immediate reinforcement required. And there at the bottom, James's signature, bold and careless, dated the day before her accident. Her stomach twisted, a cold knot forming. "He signed off on it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He knew." The words tasted like ash, bitter and final. She looked up at Nia, whose eyes held a fire that mirrored her own. "Why would he—" "Don't," Nia cut in, her voice sharp. "Don't let him make you doubt yourself." She leaned forward, her hands clasped tight, as if holding back her own fury. "I checked with a stagehand who was there. He said James pushed to cut costs, ignored the warnings, said it was just a formality." Amara's chest ached, a hollow pain that wasn't from her injury. She remembered James's face after the accident, pale and trembling, his hands gripping hers in the hospital. "I'll make this right," he'd said, his voice breaking. She'd believed him then, clung to his words like a lifeline. Now they felt like a lie, each syllable a brick in the wall he'd built around her. She wheeled to the window, her hands shaking as she pushed herself forward. The city sprawled below, indifferent, its lights a mockery of the stars she used to chase. "He's been keeping me here," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "The meds, the appointments, the way he talks to me. Like I'm fragile, like I'm nothing." Her fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. "He wants me invisible." Nia stood, crossing the room in 2 strides, her hand resting lightly on Amara's shoulder. "You're not invisible," she said fiercely. "You're Amara freaking Jackson, the woman who made grown men cry with a single violin solo." Amara's lips twitched, a spark of warmth cutting through the cold. Nia knelt beside her, her eyes blazing. "We're going to fight this, together." Amara nodded, her throat tight. She reached for the coffee, the warmth of the mug seeping into her hands, grounding her. "I found something else," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "In his office. Bank statements. Transfers to an account I don't recognize. Thousands, Nia, for a penthouse, jewelry, things he never told me about." Nia's eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. "Sophia," she said, not a question but a confirmation. Amara nodded, her jaw tight. "I need to know how deep this goes," she said. "If he planned the accident, if he's stealing from the fund." Her voice broke, but she pushed through. "I need proof." "Then we get it," Nia said, standing, her voice like steel. "I know a guy, Malik lawyer, worked with us on the festival deal. He's discreet and he's good. We'll dig, Amara. We'll find everything." Amara's heart pounded, a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Fierce, alive. She thought of James's hand on Sophia's waist, his smug toast to the future. "He thinks he's won," she thought, her pulse a drum beat. "He thinks I'm done." But she wasn't. She could still hear the music in her mind, sharp and defiant, a score for a reckoning. "Start with the fun," she said, her voice steady now, a conductor taking control. "And the theater. I want every document, every email." She paused, her eyes meeting Nia's. "And I'm done with the pills. I flushed them last night." Nia's grin was fierce, a warrior's smile. "There's my girl," she said, squeezing Amara's hand. "Let's write his ending." Amara's fingers brushed the piano keys, a single note ringing out, clear, unbroken. The sound lingered, a promise, a challenge. She wasn't the woman James thought he'd silenced. She was a symphony, building, and he wouldn't see it coming. Amara's fingers trembled as she opened the laptop, its screen casting a cold glow across the studio. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside and the erratic thud of her heart. She could still feel the weight of James's gaze from last night, the way his eyes had searched hers for cracks, for surrender. But surrender wasn't in her score anymore. Her skin prickled with defiance, a melody rising in her chest. sharp, insistent, demanding to be heard. Nia sat across from her cello case propped against the wall like a silent ally. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice low, her eyes scanning the room as if James might materialize from the shadows. Amara nodded, her jaw tight, and typed in the password she'd memorized years ago when she and James shared everything. His email opened, a Pandora's box of secrets. Her breath hitched as she scrolled, each subject line a stab. Transfer confirmation, penthouse deposit, Sophia, meeting details. Her fingers froze over a receipt for a diamond necklace, dated the day after her last hospital visit. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a performance, meticulously staged. "Look at this," she whispered, turning the screen toward Naya. A bank statement showed a transfer of $50,000 from their music scholarship fund to an unfamiliar account. Nia's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "He's bleeding the fund dry," she said, her voice a low growl. "For her." Amara's chest tightened, not with pain but with clarity. She clicked another email, this one from a contractor at the theater where she'd fallen. "Repairs postponed per your request, Mr. Jackson. Budget reallocated." Her pulse surged, a drumbeat of rage. "He didn't just know," she said, her voice trembling but sharp. "He chose to let it happen." The words felt like a blade, cutting through the fog of doubt she'd carried for years. Nia leaned closer, her hand brushing Amara's arm. A silent anchor. "We need more than emails," she said. "Something undeniable." Amara nodded, her mind racing. She thought of the pills James had pressed into her hand each night, his voice soft but commanding. "For your pain, Mara." She'd trusted him, swallowed them without question, even as her thoughts grew sluggish, her creativity dimmed. Last night she'd poured the bottle into the sink, watching the capsules swirl away. Now her mind was sharp, a violin string pulled taut. "I recorded him," Nia said suddenly, pulling out her phone. Amara's eyes snapped to her heart skipping. "Last week, at the studio. He didn't know I was there." She played the file and James's voice filled the room, smooth and intimate, speaking to someone, Sophia no doubt. "She's not a problem anymore. Just keep her calm, and we're set." The words were a punch, stealing Amara's breath. But it was the tone, calm, calculated, devoid of remorse, that twisted the knife. She closed her eyes, her gift kicking in. She heard the arrogance in his cadence, the faint tremor of guilt he couldn't hide. It was her music, her ability to hear truth in sound, that confirmed it. James wasn't just unfaithful. He was orchestrating her erasure. "We need Malik," Amara said, her voice steady now, a conductor's command. "He'll know how to trace the money." Nia nodded, already texting. "And the theater," Amara added, her fingers curling into fists. "I want every report, every signature. If he planned this—" She trailed off, the thought too heavy, too dark. Her hands shook, but not from fear, from the fire building inside her, a crescendo she couldn't contain. Nia's phone pinged and she grinned. "Malik's in. He says to keep a log, every detail, every interaction. If James is building a case against you, we build a better one." Amara's lips twitched, a spark of hope cutting through the rage. She opened a notebook, her pen moving with purpose, jotting down the moments of control. The way James canceled her family's visits, claiming she was too fragile. The appointments he scheduled without her input. The pills he watched her swallow, his eyes cold, calculating. "He thinks he's writing my ending," she said, her voice low, fierce. "But he's wrong." She turned back to the laptop, her fingers flying now, digging deeper. Another email caught her eye, a message from James to a doctor, requesting stronger sedatives for her condition. Her stomach churned, but she didn't flinch. She forwarded it to Nia, her hands steady despite the storm inside. "He's been drugging me," she said, the words tasting like venom. "Keeping me quiet." Nia's eyes blazed, her hands clenching. "We're going to bury him," she said, her voice a vow. "But we need to be smart. He's got connections, money. We can't slip." Amara nodded, her mind racing, plotting. She thought of the fund, her passion project, meant to lift up young musicians like she'd once been. James had turned it into his personal bank, but she'd turn it back into a weapon. She wheeled to the piano, her fingers brushing the keys. A single note rang out, clear and defiant, like a call to battle. "I'm done hiding," she said, her voice a melody of resolve. "We start with the fun, then the theater, and then—" She paused, her eyes meeting Nia's, a shared understanding passing between them. "We make him hear me." The note lingered, a spark in the dark, growing into a flame. Amara's heart pounded, not with fear but with purpose. She wasn't the broken refrain James had tried to compose. She was a symphony, rising, and he would feel every note. Amara's pulse thrummed like a metronome, each beat a reminder of the stakes. The studio was a cocoon of shadows, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. Her wheelchair felt less like a cage now, more like a chariot, carrying her toward a reckoning. The laptop screen glowed, casting sharp angles across her face as she pored over the latest email from Malik. Fund transfers traced to an offshore account. Need more time to link it to James definitively. Her fingers tightened around the armrests, her knuckles whitening. Time was a luxury she didn't have. James's voice from Nia's recording echoed in her mind. She's not a problem anymore. A cold, deliberate note that struck deeper than any blade. Nia paced behind her boots clicking against the hardwood floor. "Malik's good, but he's cautious," she said, her voice taut with frustration. "We need something ironclad, Amara. Something that'll make a jury gasp." Amara nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen, where a grainy photo from the theater's security footage showed James inspecting the stage platform hours before her fall. His posture was casual, too casual, his hand brushing the faulty bolts as if testing their weakness. Her breath hitched, a sharp sting in her chest. He knew. The thought was a drumbeat, relentless, driving her forward. "I'm done waiting," she said, her voice low, resolute. She turned to Nia, her eyes burning with a fire she hadn't felt in years. "We need to move faster. He's planning something. I can feel it." Her fingers twitched, itching to play the piano, to channel the chaos in her heart into sound. Instead, she reached for her phone, texting Malik. "Check the doctor's records. James requested sedatives. I want names, dates, everything." Nia stopped pacing, her gaze softening. "You're different today," she said, a half-smile tugging at her lips. "Like the old Amara, the one who'd rewrite a score at 2 a.m. because it wasn't perfect." Amara's lips twitched, a flicker of warmth cutting through the ice in her veins. She wanted to believe it, but the weight of James's betrayal clung to her, a dissonant chord she couldn't resolve. "I'm not her," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Not yet, but I'm getting there." She wheeled to the piano, her hands hovering over the keys. A single note rang out, clear and defiant, like a heartbeat. "He took my music, Nia. My voice. I'm taking it back." Nia nodded, pulling out her phone again. "I've got an idea," she said, her eyes glinting with mischief. "A concert. Online, low-key, for the scholarship fund. We say it's to honor you, but really, it's to raise money for Malik's digging. James won't suspect a thing." Amara's heart skipped, the idea sparking like a struck match. A concert, her stage, her rules. She could feel the melody forming, not just in her mind but in her bones. A score for justice. "Do it," she said, her voice steady, a conductor's command. "But I'm playing. One piece. My terms." Nia's grin was fierce, a warrior's salute. "That's my girl," she said, already typing furiously. Amara turned back to the piano, her fingers finding the keys, a tentative melody emerging. Soft at first, then bold, like a storm gathering strength. Her phone buzzed, a message from her sister Elise. "I'm coming tomorrow. No excuses this time." Amara's throat tightened, a flood of guilt and longing washing over her. James had kept Elise away, feeding her lies about Amara's fragility. She typed back, her hands trembling. "Please, I need you." The reply was instant, always. Amara's eyes stung, but she blinked the tears away, her resolve hardening. She wasn't alone anymore. "Malik's on the doctor," Nia said, breaking the silence. "And I found a stagehand who'll talk. He says James pressured him to skip the repairs. He's scared, but he'll meet us." Amara nodded, her mind racing. She thought of the pills, the way James had watched her swallow them, his eyes cold, calculating. She'd stopped taking them 3 days ago, and already the fog was lifting, her thoughts sharp as a violin's high C. But with clarity came fear. Fear of what James might do if he sensed her rebellion. "He locked his office last night," she said, her voice low, her fingers still on the keys. "After the party, I saw him slip something into his desk. A notebook, maybe. He never locks it." Nia's eyes narrowed, her hand pausing mid-text. "Then we get in," she said simply. "Tonight, when he's out." Amara's heart pounded, a crescendo building. She thought of James's smile at the party, the way he'd paraded Sophia like a trophy. She thought of the stage collapsing, the pain that had rewritten her life. "If he planned it," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "If he meant for me to fall—" She couldn't finish, the words too heavy, too raw. Nia knelt beside her, her hand warm on Amara's arm. "We'll find out," she said, her voice fierce. "And when we do, he'll pay." Amara nodded, her eyes fixed on the piano, the keys gleaming like a challenge. She played another note, then another, the melody growing, sharp and unyielding. It was her song now, not his. "We start tonight," she said, her voice a vow, her fingers dancing across the keys. The music swelled, a prelude to war. James thought he'd silenced her, but he was wrong. She was composing again, and this time, the final note would be his. Amara's heart thundered, a wild rhythm against her ribs, as she wheeled into the shadowed wings of the theater. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and anticipation. The same stage where her world had shattered, now alive, with the hum of a waiting crowd. Her fingers twitched, not with nerves but with a fire that had been smoldering too long. The piano gleamed center stage, its keys a silent challenge, daring her to reclaim what James had stolen. She could still hear his voice from Nia's recording. "She's not a problem anymore." Each syllable a nail in the coffin he'd built for her. Tonight she'd pry it open. Nia stood beside her, her eyes scanning the crowd through the curtain's gap. "He's here," she whispered, her voice taut. Front row was Sophia, smirking like he owns the place. Amara's jaw tightened, her pulse a sharp staccato. She pictured James's tailored suit, his arm around Sophia, his confidence a mask for the lies she was about to unravel. Her hands gripped the armrests, the cool metal grounding her. But inside a melody surged, fierce, unyielding, ready to explode. "You ready?" Nia asked, her hand brushing Amara's shoulder, a quiet anchor. Amara nodded, her throat tight. She'd spent the last week with Malik, piecing together the evidence. Bank statements, emails, the stagehand's testimony about James's orders to skip repairs. They'd found the notebook in his office, its pages a damning ledger of diverted funds, $200,000 to Sophia's account, $80,000 for a penthouse deposit. But it was the audio Nia had captured, James's voice plotting to keep her calm, that turned her rage into resolve. Tonight wasn't just a concert, it was her stage, her score. The house lights dimmed, the crowd's murmurs fading to a hush. Amara wheeled onto the stage, the spotlight catching the deep brown of her skin, the fire in her eyes. The audience clapped, polite but hesitant, their pity a familiar weight. She ignored it, her fingers brushing the piano keys, the touch electric. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice clear, resonant, like the first note of a symphony. "This is for the scholarship fund, for the music we fight for." Her eyes flicked to James, his smile frozen, his hand tightening on Sophia's. She began to play, her fingers coaxing a melody from the keys, soft at first, a lullaby laced with longing. The crowd leaned forward, drawn in, but Amara's mind was elsewhere, weaving the truth into the music. Each note carried a memory, the stage collapsing, the pills James pressed into her hand, the lies he'd spun to keep her small. The melody shifted, growing jagged, urgent, the chords echoing his recorded voice, which she'd layered into the track. "Just keep her calm." The words, faint at first, pulsed through the speakers, disguised as part of the score. The crowd stirred, confused, but James's face paled, his eyes darting to the sound booth. Amara's voice joined the music, soft but piercing, her lyrics a coded accusation. You built a stage to break me. Thought I'd fade away. The screen behind her flickered to life, showing bank statements, emails, the theater's inspection report with James's signature. The crowd gasped, whispers rippling like a storm. Sophia's hand dropped from James's, her eyes wide with shock. Amara's fingers flew faster, the music swelling, a crescendo of truth. You stole the notes I wrote, but I'm singing anyway. James stood, his chair scraping, his voice cutting through the music. Amara, stop this! His tone was desperate, a crack in his polished facade. The crowd turned, their eyes on him now, not her. She didn't falter, her hands steady, the melody relentless. Sit down, James, she said, her voice a blade, carrying over the music. This is my song. The screen flashed again. A photo of the penthouse receipt, the necklace, the offshore account. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a chorus of disbelief. James lunged toward the stage, but Nia signaled security, who stepped forward, blocking his path. His eyes locked on Amara's, wild with panic. You're making a mistake, he hissed, his voice low, meant only for her. You'll ruin everything. She leaned forward, her fingers still dancing on the keys, her voice a quiet storm. You ruined us, she said, her words sharp, final. The music hit its peak, a single piercing note that hung in the air, a declaration. She stood slowly, gripping the cane she'd hidden beside the piano. The crowd gasped again, louder this time as she took a step, her legs trembling but defiant. The pain was there, but so was her strength, a melody she'd forgotten she could play. Sophia stood, her face ashen, and slipped out of the row, disappearing into the shadows. James's shoulders slumped, his fight draining as the crowd's eyes bore into him. Amara finished the piece, her hands lingering on the final chord, the sound echoing like a gavel. She turned to the audience, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. This fund was my dream, she said. He tried to steal it, but dreams don't die so easily. The applause was tentative at first, then thunderous, a wave of sound that lifted her. She looked at James, his face a mask of defeat, and felt no pity, only power. The melody in her heart was hers again, and it was only the beginning. Amara's hands still trembled from the weight of the piano keys, the final chord of her performance lingering in her bones like a pulse. She sat in the quiet of her studio, the city's hum beyond the window a distant murmur compared to the storm in her chest. The news played on her phone, a relentless loop. Music mogul James Jackson detained on charges of embezzlement and fraud. Her eyes traced the words, but it was his face, pale, hollow, caught by cameras as he was led away, that burned into her. No triumph came, only a hollow ache, like a note played too long, fading into dissonance. Nia burst through the door, her breath quick, her eyes blazing. They've got him, Amara, she said, tossing her coat onto a chair. Malik says the evidence is airtight. Bank records, the stagehand's testimony, even Sophia's statement. She's talking to the DA to save herself. Amara's lips twitched, not a smile but a reflex, sharp and bitter. Sophia's betrayal of James mirrored his own, a cruel symmetry. She wheeled to the window, her fingers brushing the cane propped against the wall, its presence a quiet victory. She left him, Amara said, her voice low, almost lost in the city's drone. Just like that. Her chest tightened, not with jealousy but with the weight of what she'd uncovered. James's lies, his manipulation, the stage he'd rigged to break her. She thought of the hospital, his hand on hers, promising to fix everything. The memory stung, a wound reopened. He didn't just betray me, she thought, her nails digging into her palms. He rewrote me. Nia knelt beside her, her hand warm on Amara's arm. You did this, she said, her voice fierce but soft. You took him down. The fund's safe now. Yours again. Amara nodded, but her eyes were distant, fixed on the city lights. The scholarship fund, her dream to lift up young musicians, had been gutted by James's greed. Malik's latest report confirmed it. $300,000 siphoned to Sophia, $100,000 more to offshore accounts. But it was the stagehand's words that haunted her. He told me to skip the bolts, said it'd hold for one night. Her breath hitched, a sharp pain in her chest. He meant for me to fall, she whispered. the words tasting like ash. Nia's hand tightened, but she didn't speak, letting the silence carry Amara's truth. She thought of the pills, the fog they'd cast over her mind, dulling her music, her fight. She'd stopped taking them a week ago, and now each day felt like a note reclaimed, clear and sharp. But clarity brought fear. Fear of what else James had planned, what other traps he'd laid. Her phone buzzed, Elise's name flashing on the screen. "I'm here. Outside." Amara's heart lurched, a swell of longing and guilt. She hadn't seen her sister in years, not since James had woven his lies, claiming Amara was too fragile for visitors. She typed back, her fingers trembling. "Come in, please." The door opened minutes later, and Elise's silhouette filled the frame, her eyes wet but fierce. "Mara," she said, her voice breaking as she crossed the room, kneeling to pull Amara into a hug. The embrace was a melody, warm and familiar, one Amara had forgotten she knew. "I believed him," Elise whispered, her voice thick with regret. "He said you didn't want me here." Amara's throat tightened, tears burning her eyes. She gripped Elise's hand, her skin warm against her own. "He lied," she said, her voice cracking. "To both of us." Elise nodded, her jaw tight, and Amara saw her own fire reflected in her sister's eyes, a shared resolve, a rhythm reborn. Malik's call was interrupted, his voice clipped, urgent. "We found something else," he said. "James hired a composer to mimic your style, passing off their work as yours to keep the contracts coming. It's copyright fraud, Amara." Another nail in his coffin. Her stomach twisted, a fresh wound. Her music, her soul, had been stolen, repackaged for profit. But the rage was fleeting, replaced by a spark of purpose. "File it," she said, her voice steady, a conductor's command. "All of it." Nia grinned, already texting Malik. "We're building a fortress," she said. "He won't walk away from this." Amara nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, tracing the melody she'd played last night. It had been more than a performance. It was a declaration, a reclaiming of her voice. The crowd's applause still echoed in her ears, their gasps as the screen revealed James's crimes. She'd stood, her legs trembling but defiant, and for the first time in years, she'd felt whole. "I'm starting over," she said, her voice soft but firm, her eyes on Elise. "The fun, the music, me." Elise squeezed her hand, her smile fierce. "You never stopped, Mara. You just needed the right stage." Amara's lips curved, a real smile this time, fragile but true. She thought of the piano, waiting in the corner, its keys a canvas for her next score. Her phone buzzed again, a news alert. James Jackson's assets frozen pending investigation. The penthouse, the necklace, his empire, all crumbling. Amara's heart didn't soar, but it steadied, a rhythm finding its tempo. She wasn't done. The music was hers again, and she'd play it louder than ever. Amara's breath was steady, a quiet rhythm against the hum of the crowd. She stood slowly, her cane a silent partner, at the edge of the New Arts Center's stage, its polished wood gleaming under soft lights. The air carried the scent of fresh paint and possibility, a stark contrast to the sterile cage of her old life. Her dark eyes swept the room, catching Elise's proud nod, Nia's fierce grin, and the eager faces of young musicians clutching instruments, their futures funded by the assets she'd clawed back from James's ruin. Her heart thumped, not with fear but with a melody reborn, its notes sharp and free. The past year had been a tempest. James's trial had unfolded like a discordant score. Embezzlement, fraud, and whispers of attempted harm, each charge a hammer striking his legacy to dust. Amara had watched from the courtroom's front row, her hands steady, her gaze unflinching as he avoided her eyes. Sophia's testimony, clipped, reluctant, had sealed his fate, her own shame a quiet footnote. Amara felt no pity, only a hollow ache where love had once lived. "He stole my song," she thought, her fingers brushing the cane's handle. "But I wrote a better one." Now she faced the crowd, her voice clear, resonant. "This center," she said, "is for those who've been told their music doesn't matter." Her words carried weight, each syllable a note in a symphony of defiance. For those who navigate the world differently but dream just as fiercely. The audience leaned forward, their applause warm, genuine, not the pitying claps she'd once endured. She felt it in her bones. A shift, a reclaiming of her stage. Elise stepped beside her hand light on Amara's arm. "You did this," she whispered, her eyes wet but bright. Amara's throat tightened, the memory of their reunion a vivid chord. Elise's hug, her tears, the years James had stolen with his lies. "We did this," Amara corrected, her voice soft but firm. Elise's smile was a melody, one Amara had missed too long. The program she'd launched, funded by James's seized assets, was more than a scholarship. It was a lifeline, free training, adaptive instruments, a studio where disability didn't mean defeat. She'd poured her heart into it, designing software that let musicians compose with voice commands, her own gift of hearing emotions woven into the code. Tonight, the first graduates would perform her new symphony, a piece born from her pain, its notes a map of her survival. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from Malik. "James wants to see you. Video call, prison. Your call." Her pulse quickened, a sharp staccato. She hadn't seen him since the trial, his face a mask of defeat as the gavel fell. She thought of his voice, once warm, now cold in her memory. "Can you forgive me?" The question had lingered, a sour note she'd refused to play. She typed back, her fingers steady. "Set it up. One time." The call came later, in a quiet room off the stage. James's face filled the screen, thinner, his eyes hollowed by months behind bars. "Mara," he said, his voice a ghost of its old charm. "You look strong." His gaze flicked to her cane, a flicker of surprise. She stood, her legs trembling but defiant, and his eyes widened, a crack in his composure. "I am," she said, her voice a blade, sharp and precise. "No thanks to you." Her fingers tightened on the cane, grounding her. She saw it in his face. The guilt, the fear, the man who'd thought he could rewrite her. "You tried to erase me," she said, her words slow, deliberate. "My music, my life. Why?" His jaw clenched, his eyes darting away. "I was scared," he said finally, his voice low, broken. "You were always bigger than me, Mara. Your talent, your heart. I couldn't keep up." The confession hung between them, a dissonant chord. She waited, her silence a demand. "The stage. I didn't mean for you to get hurt. I just wanted you to slow down." Her chest ached, rage and sorrow colliding. "You wanted me small," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "You drugged me, stole from me, broke me. But I'm still here." She leaned closer, her eyes burning. "I forgive myself for trusting you. But you live with this." She ended the call, her breath shuddering, but her heart was steady. The weight of his betrayal didn't vanish, but it lightened, a burden she no longer carried alone. She wheeled back to the stage where Nia waited, her cello at the ready. "You okay?" Nia asked, her eyes searching. "Better," Amara said, her voice soft but sure. She took her place at the piano, the crowd's hum a backdrop to her thoughts. The symphony began, its opening notes a whisper, then a roar, each chord a piece of her journey. Pain, betrayal, triumph. The young musicians played with her, their instruments a chorus of resilience, their faces alight with purpose. As the final note rang out, Amara stood again, her cane a partner, not a crutch. The applause was thunderous, but it was the silence within her that mattered, a quiet born of freedom. She looked at Elise, at Nia, at the musicians she'd lifted up, and knew this was her legacy, not his. The melody in her heart was hers alone now, and it would never be silenced again. Amara's melody lingers, a haunting echo of resilience forged in betrayal's fire. Her symphony, born from pain, now lifts others, its notes a testament to a spirit unbroken. James's empire lies in ruins, his lies exposed, but Amara's victory is not his defeat, it's her rebirth. Each chord she plays, each step she takes, defies the cage he built. The stage is hers again, shared with those who dare to dream despite their scars. Her music, once silenced, now soars, a reminder. True strength sings loudest in the dark, and Amara's song will never fade.